Hi everyone, hope you're well. Chris Cowlin here. Now, before we get into it, I'd just like to inform you about a new website selling quality current and retro Spurs jerseys. okjersey.com. They sell all current and retro Tottenham Hotspur shirts in all sizes. They sell the current fan and player versions, as well as the 80s and 90s retro shirts, including my very favourite, the 1991 FA Cup final shirt. You can order very easily from okjersey.com, and if you use the code Chris, you will receive an 8% discount off your final order. You can also use the QR code on the top left of your screen. And by the way, they also have some training wear here and the 25-26 colour special edition jersey. Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another edition of the Daily Tottenham Transfer News Show. My name is Chris Cowlin, and today I'll be joined by sports journalist Josh Hughes, of course Tottenham fan as well. We will be covering all of the latest Spurs news, rumours and reports. Today is, of course, the 8th of January, day 8 of the January transfer window. 25 days left of this window. Of course, it closes on the 2nd of Feb at 7 p.m. Now, we're live on YouTube, Facebook and X. Please do get involved and make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're watching on YouTube, please press like, comment below and turn on that notification bell so YouTube informs you every single time we go live and we upload a video. Josh, evening. How are you?
I'm okay. Last night it felt like probably the lowest point that I can remember since Pochettino was sacked. It was that bad. I think we were all feeling grumpy after the Sunderland game. We really needed a result. And actually, to be honest, the performance was not one of the worst this season. I actually think it was weirdly one of the better performances we've put together this season. Some of the football was very good. Some of the goals scored, the chances, we were all over them at the start of the game, but sloppy defending. We come away with a 3-2 defeat at Bournemouth. And then we're hit with the crazy story, however you want to put it, of Thomas Frank with a Arsenal branded coffee cup, which he was asked about, of course, in his presser. And he was very quick to kind of downplay. But I think that was just sort of adding insult to injury for us Spurs fans. And now we are, of course, 8 days into the transfer market, and we are no closer yet to signing a player. Of course, there's been a few reports here and there, but we've also been hit with the news that Kudus is out until April. Bergvall picked up an injury. Bentancur with a hamstring injury too. So after selling Brennan Johnson, now we're already 3 additional players down on top of Solanke and Kulusevski, of course, long-term absentees. It is starting to paint a very familiar picture for us as Spurs fans to last season, where we're struggling massively in the league and the injuries just keep piling up, and Spurs have had more injuries. I said this to you yesterday, but Spurs have had more injuries than any other club in Europe's top 5 leagues, and that injury list just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And with these games every few days, of course, Aston Villa, a huge FA Cup game at the weekend, now is the time where we really have to act in the transfer market. We cannot be waiting until the final minutes.
It does look like we are acting in the January transfer market, because Italian journalist and transfer expert Fabrizio Romero has stated that Tottenham have agreed personal terms with Brazilian left-back Souza ahead of potential move. Negotiations underway with Santos as new bid is anticipated soon, with details still missing. And Sky Germany on this story, they are stating that the 19-year-old Santos left-back talent is now on the verge of joining Tottenham, with Santos in concrete negotiations. This one does look pretty close, Josh, and Sky Germany and, of course, Fabrizio Romano, very reliable outlets. What do you make of this one? Is this a player that could feature for Spurs this season in the second part of the 25-26 campaign, or is this a player for the future that perhaps will join the development side?
Well, of course, we naturally look at it and say it's one for the future when you look purely at his age. But the fact that he's been playing Brazilian top-flight football for a club as big as Santos is something that we can all be encouraged by. And I would just say given the injury situation at Spurs, although the one bit of positive injury news that we did get was that Destiny Udogie appears to be moving closer to getting back to full fitness. We're going to need every player we can get. And I don't know what the situation's going to be like in terms of, work permit, etc. That's usually a factor with these types of South American transfers. However, it would be good to get one over the line. And clearly, Spurs see a lot in him to be going back with a second offer, agreeing the personal terms. I mean, that was never going to be a problem. I think attracting a player from Brazil to Premier League wages is always going to be a massive jump. Yeah. So I think that's always going to be a fairly straightforward one for Spurs to agree. But for me, clearly, he's been brought into the first team. I'd be very, very surprised if this is going to be a sort of another Yang Min-hyuk situation where he's expected to go out on loan, because right now our squad is far too threadbare to afford to send more players out on loan. We need to be buying players that are ready now, and left back is clearly a position that Spurs needed to strengthen. So to me, this is clearly a player that the club feels is ready to learn off Udogie and challenge from now until the end of the season.
This next one is also from Sky Germany. I must say that Sky Germany today have been quite hot on the Spurs transfer scene. They are stating that Tottenham Hotspur have a clear internal plan at the moment to only decide on João Palhinha's future after the end of the season. Tottenham Hotspur Football Club have an option to buy in the summer set at 25 million euros guaranteed, with potential add-ons through bonuses. The option can rise up to 30 million euros. I know we spoke a little bit about this yesterday. Would you think that that is a good amount of money for a player of this caliber for us to sign on a permanent deal? Would you like to see this one happen or not, Josh?
Well, you asked me this question yesterday and I wasn't entirely sure. And then he scored that overhead kick. And actually, I thought had a very good performance. I think the thing that has become increasingly clear to me is that, I don't think any of us want to see Bentancur and Palhinha start together in terms of the progressiveness, the ball carrying, the sort of turning defence into attack. It's not the most fluid thing at all. But Palhinha has scored quite a few important goals for Spurs this season. That was, let's not forget, his second overhead kick that he scored for Spurs this season. Of course, he saved a point for us against Wolves at home as well. Palhinha is a player with great experience. And actually, do you know what? The thing that really stood out to me was, amongst all of the sort of reports and the videos, you posted a number of videos after the game at the Vitality. Palhinha was the first player, I think, to come out and clarify comments around his engagements with the Tottenham supporters, who were clearly incredibly frustrated and making their feelings very clear. And I really liked the response that Palhinha gave. It was very much respectful to the fans, and that's not something we've always had from players. And it was also, I think, having scored in that game and actually put in a really good shift, it showed some real leadership qualities there. And I think that, you talk about 30 million euros as a maximum fee, that's 26 million pounds. And for a Portugal international with that level of experience, who will be going to the World Cup almost certainly, you're going to be hard stretched to find a better steal at that price. So I think for me, while I still have question marks over how he fits Thomas Frank's system, he is an asset and he is a very good player, and that can't be disputed. So for me, at that price tag, do I think he's the answer at number 6? Not necessarily. But actually, if Spurs want to start, we've heard that phrase, compete on all fronts. The board have used it themselves. Mm-hmm. That's exactly the type of player you want in there. And then if you can bring in a younger, talented 6 as well to compete, is exactly the type of position you'd want to be in, where you have an experienced international player that can teach and mentor a younger player, but also, compete and provide real security in those key moments. And one of the players that I used to really like, and he was very much hit and miss amongst Spurs fans, was Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, for that exact reason. And for me, if Højbjerg was one of those players that you brought on after 70 minutes to close a game out, more often than not, he would be very reliable at doing so. And I can see Palhinha taking up a similar role. So if the question is, do we sign Palhinha? Yes, for me. But then I think I would pave the way for Rodrigo Bentancur to leave the club, and you bring in someone who is of a much higher quality in that six to complement each other. I think that gives us a little bit more strength than what we're currently seeing.
Now, in this opening week of the January transfer window, Josh, two players, both Manchester City players, have been on Tottenham's radar. Omar Mamouche and Savinho. Now, Pep Guardiola has confirmed that Savinho is actually out for the next couple of months. So this one looks extremely unlikely. I know a number of reports stating that Manchester City didn't want to sell anyway. Sky Germany, again, have stated that Omar Mamouche currently has no plans to leave Manchester City in the January transfer window. And at this stage, he does intend to stay and fight for his place. However, there are numerous inquiries on the table, including from top clubs. And Sky Germany also state it has been denied that there have been talks with Tottenham. Disappointing for you to hear about Savinho's injury and Mamouche not being in talks with Tottenham?
Yeah, I mean, look, Savinho was never one I was entirely sold on, to be honest. You're looking at 70 million for a player who hasn't given a particularly significant ROI, the return on investment. So that's not the end of the world. Mamouche, for me, is streets above Savinho and a player that I would have much rather Spurs signed. But I think things can change very quickly. And I think what I seem to understand, if you sort of try and read between the lines with this Mamouche situation, I think Mamouche may be prepared to leave Manchester City if City tell him that his game time is going to diminish even further. And the signing of Antoine Semenyo would do just that, because right now, Jeremy Doku is at the top of his game and he's been absolutely outstanding. Ryan Cherky is playing phenomenally as well. Haaland's going to start week in, week out at striker if he's fit. And Phil Foden is going to keep that 10 position the way he's been playing. So for me, all of those sort of positions that Mamouche can cover, and he does sort of tick those boxes that Spurs love. Spurs love a versatile attacking player. The question is, for Mamouche is, would he come to Spurs? Are there better clubs on the table for him? Of course, he came from Germany. He was doing very, very well at Eintracht Frankfurt. So I think for me, if a German club came in, potentially he might be tempted to go on loan. But things can change quickly. Of course, I would love to see a player like Omar Mamouche at Spurs, but I don't expect anything to happen until the end of the window anyway, because I think Egypt have a very good chance at AFCON this year. And he's going to be there until, the very final kick. So, look, Mamouche would be a huge addition for Spurs, but I also think we need to be looking elsewhere because there's too many moving parts. And I think one thing I kind of come to accept with Spurs is kind of knowing our place in the food chain. And unfortunately, clubs like Manchester City, when they've won everything they have to win, and they're in a title race, albeit slimly now, they very much get to dictate what happens with their players and when. Spurs, unfortunately, don't have that same power. So, look, let's just wait and see on that one. But would I take Mamouche? Absolutely.
Yeah, Mido actually recommended that Spurs ought to sign him a couple of years ago as well. Let's talk about a couple of loans, or one loan confirmed, one potentially coming back. Oliver Iro has joined League One side Mansfield Town on loan for the remainder of this season. This is an official statement by Tottenham today. The 19-year-old forward, a product of our academy, has scored 5 goals in 12 appearances for our under-21s so far this term. He has also netted twice in the UEFA Youth League in away matches against Monaco and PSG. And the Sun have reported today that Tottenham have discussed cancelling Tyrese Hall's season-long loan at Notts County and assessing him with the first team. The attack-minded midfielder 20 has excelled since landing at Meadow Lane in the summer. Josh, with the Tyrese Hall one, are you surprised that Tottenham would recall? Because we've spoken quite often, and including yesterday, and both of us agreed that it was, Tottenham have done very well on recalling, loan players when it hasn't worked out. But this one has been a success. But the Sun are stating that, could be assessing to put them or to put him in the first team squad.
Well, look, I think first of all, Yang Min-hyuk is a good example of, we recalled a player who was doing pretty well on loan at Portsmouth, and he's gone to Coventry, the team top of the Championship. Now, for Tyrese Hall, I'm a big fan of Tyrese Hall. I've watched him a few times when I've had the chance to go and watch the under-23s, and he's an impressive player. I always got the sense that he was quite raw. And of course, Notts County is a club with great history, but it is League Two. So for me, I would much rather see Tyrese Hall assessed, perhaps, but then given a loan in a higher division, than potentially risking him in the first team. Now, I know that contradicts what I said yesterday, because I would love to see young players given a chance. But to me, that seems like a cop-out in terms of going out and getting a talented player in that position where we are light. So for me, the absolute priority must be signing top quality players in the positions we're light in, and then looking to gently sort of drip feed some of these young talents in where possible. And so for me, Tyrese Hall playing in League Two, he's clearly proving he's very good for League Two. I'd much rather see him now excel in League One or the Championship instead. And on Iro, I think, Mansfield's going to be a really good loan for him. It's going to be great exposure. Again, it's a good club. It's a club that I've been to a few times during my time when I was a student in Nottingham. They are currently 11th in League One, but they're only, a few wins away from, pushing for playoffs. And like anything in the Football League, you put a run of 3-4 games together and suddenly you find yourself in a very, very good position. And so I think Iro having an opportunity to lead the line at Mansfield, and potentially be a difference between them finishing mid-table and pushing for a playoff spot, I think will be great exposure for him. So I'm a big fan of Spurs players going out on loan to clubs that are competitive, as opposed to those that are always in a relegation fight. I think that's where sort of the likes of Ashley Phillips have perhaps struggled on loans in the past. And so we, of course, saw the effect that Josh Keeley and Donnelly had at Leyton Orient as well when they had their playoff push. So I'm a big fan of this Iro loan. I think that's going to be really good for him. But for me, for Tyrese Hall, I'd like to see him, given a chance in a higher division, see how he can cope there, and then let's assess in the summer.
With Oliver Iro, it's very important, Josh, isn't it, for the first loan for a player in their career, because they develop as a person, develop as a player, absolutely, but a very important move for them personally.
Absolutely, and the other thing that we just need to kind of bear in mind, and please don't take this for, this comparison too literally, but it took a number of failed loans for Harry Kane before it eventually clicked into gear. And I think Portsmouth was the loan where it really sort of clicked for Harry Kane. So, Millwall. So I think we shouldn't be disappointed if it doesn't quite work out, but I think having that first team football exposure is vitally important. And one of the things that we all want to see really is we want to see more of our own thriving on loan and then getting an opportunity in the first team to thrive. And, even the likes of Will Lancashire scoring recently for Oxford United. In fact, I think it was in his last game, because their game afterwards got called off for a frozen pitch. So, I'm really pleased to see when Spurs players can perform well on loan. And equally, I think we need to not set too high expectations at this point. Let's take the pressure off of him. He's going to a good football club in a good league, in a very competitive league, and all the best to him.
Now, you talk about quality players, and I always talk about Premier League proven players and players that could make a real impact. This is certainly one. This is also from Sky Sports Germany. Kevin Schade is one to watch for the summer. as a move after the World Cup currently appears to be likely. However, Brentford still want him to stay, and they are keen on extending his contract beyond 2028. Many clubs are interested. Tottenham are among the teams closely monitoring him, as revealed. Price valuation 50 to 60 million euros. Now, they have stated, Josh, Sky Germany, that it could be a move in the summer, not in the January transfer window. And I suppose we're going to go back again of Thomas Frank and, so many people saying about how difficult it is in a January transfer window. And I'm going to read this very short statement from Thomas Frank. We are working very, very, very hard to improve the squad, but it is very, very, very difficult in this window.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If you're a big club, you act like a big club and you get the deals done and you pay the money and you offer a deal that's so irresistible to the club that you're trying to sign a player off of that they can't refuse that. And that's not what Spurs have done. That's not what Spurs tend to do. Schade is a very impressive player and a player, of course, Thomas Frank knows. But to be honest, I can't see Thomas Frank being manager of this football club next season if things carry on the way that they will. I cannot see how the board will back him, certainly with the way and how animated our fan base are and how frustrated we all are with Thomas Frank. I think it is widely accepted that Thomas Frank is not doing a good enough job. So why would we wait until the summer to sign a Thomas Frank player? It doesn't make sense to me. So if you're going to go for it now. He could make a massive difference to our season. Of course, Brentford not in Europe, so there wouldn't be any issues there. And so for me, this typifies sort of where Spurs are at, and the excuses are already being wheeled out for the undoubted failure that we will all see in the board's actions at the end of this window, because this is the same old story that repeats itself over and over and over again, right? How many times are you going to see a spade and call it something else before you eventually call it what it is? And that is where we're at. How many times can we go a transfer window where Spurs come out and the PR machine comes out, we hear the same things over and over again, and then at the end of the window, we're let down. This happens time and time again, year after year, and has been a recurring theme at Spurs for the best part of decades. So for me, I couldn't give less about a player potentially in the summer. We need to think about the here and now, and we need to think about our status as a Premier League club, where we are. I don't mean necessarily relegation, but what I mean is, do we really want to condemn ourselves to mid-table? I don't think that will be acceptable to anyone. We still, bizarrely, are not too far off away from European places, and that should be our focus. But yeah, Schade, top player, really, really rate him. Of course, there's been other reports from Brentford as well. Just one today. It was a caught offside report that was talking about Coyote, the fullback, the Italian fullback, who has arguably the best long throw in the Premier League. Really quick, really dynamic young Italian player. He came from Fiorentina. Originally, he was a Football Manager wonder kid for those that play Football Manager as well. And a player, again, that Thomas Frank brought into the club. So that one has been reported today. Manchester City also looking at him. But again, are Brentford really going to part ways with their players now when they find themselves in fifth? They find themselves in contention for European places, which who would have said that at the start of the season? I find the whole thing entirely ironic that Brentford, since getting rid of Thomas Frank, have seemed to take another step forward and are now challenging for a European place, while Spurs are in the position that Brentford found themselves in for the seasons previous. It seems like a bit of a roles reversal, and it's quite interesting to see. But if we're going to stick with the Brentford theme, the obvious one to go out and get is Igor Thiago. He's just broken the record for most goals in a Premier League season by a Brazilian player. He followed up his hat-trick at the Hill Dickinson Stadium with a brace last night for Brentford. They had no problems putting Sunderland away at home. And for me, it's the type of goals that Igor Thiago is scoring. He's scoring headers. He's scoring with his left foot, his right foot. He's going around the goalkeeper. His positional awareness is just phenomenal. And he is a player full of confidence. And I would have to say right now, if you're going to take one of Richarlison or Igor Thiago to the World Cup, if you're Carlo Ancelotti, I think you'd be taking Igor Thiago. So again, that's another one. With Brentford, the thing we know with them is it's a bit like Brighton. If you offer enough money, they will sell their players. So if Brentford is the market that we're going to be shopping in, and that's the market of players that Thomas Frank knows, has recruited, that his team, his people, his analysts have all been on that, then fair play, but let's go and get them now. And we have to accept that they're going to cost a lot of money.
I was going to ask that, Josh. When you hear that term, and a lot of clubs use it, a lot of managers use that term, and I feel like now a lot of fans use that. When you hear that term, it's very difficult. The January transfer window. Does it basically mean that it's going to be an expensive window? Because are the players there? How easy or how difficult is it to get impact players? We all want impact players to be walking in this squad, helping Thomas Frank and us move up that Premier League table, play more entertaining football, etc., etc. But how easy or difficult is it, the January window?
So this is the age-old sort of saying, right? And we look at if you look at some of the deals that have been done, right, in the Premier League in January, we had Cody Gakpo to Liverpool, you had Bruno Guimaraes to Newcastle, you had Juan Mata to Man United, you had Anthony Gordon to Newcastle, you have Luis Diaz to Liverpool, Ferran Torres to Barcelona. Fernando Torres made that 50 million plus move from Liverpool to Chelsea. I could go on. Aubameyang went to Arsenal, Pulisic went to Chelsea, Laporte went to City, Bruno Fernandes went to Man United, just to name but a few. Van Dijk and went to Liverpool, and Alisson and Enzo Fernandez to Chelsea as well. So these are just some of the names that have happened in January windows. So if anyone's going to say that it's impossible to sign top quality players, well, then they're talking absolute nonsense. But the key thing that kind of aligns all of those transfers is that was big money played by clubs that wanted players badly. And of course, in the likes of Guimaraes and Fernandes, these were players that came into the league from abroad. They weren't coming from the Premier League. So it just goes to show that those players are there if you want to put the money aside to get them. So the likes of Kenan Yildiz at Juventus, who is a player I'm a huge fan of, if you pay Juventus the money that they need, chances are you can go and get them, because these European clubs are strapped for cash and they will accept quite a big offer. But Spurs have to be prepared to break their transfer record potentially, and they have to be prepared to break their wage structure. This is exactly what I was saying to you yesterday in the point stands. It's Spurs have got to be prepared to spend big in January if they want to get the players in the door that are going to make a difference. And I'll give you one example, and this report, this keeps sort of lurking around quietly, is Conor Gallagher from Atletico Madrid. Of course, he was at Chelsea and he had a loan at Crystal Palace. From what I've been reading, it looks like Palace want to bring him back to Selhurst. Of course, he's got an affinity there because he had a great loan spell. But if Palace are in that conversation, Spurs should absolutely be in the conversation. And now that, we've got an injury to Bergvall, an injury to Kudus, an injury to Bentancur, we still don't know when Maddison and Kulusevski are going to be back. Conor Gallagher, for me, is a player that would make a huge difference to our squad. He would add a lot of attacking threat. And of course, he adds that proven experience too. He ticks that box. And Conor Gallagher will be especially motivated in a World Cup year to try and stake his claim for a spot, even though it seems probably highly unlikely that he'll get the call up. I think if you're a player that has played for England before, I think every player going into a World Cup year, we're only 5-6 months away from it, will be wanting to do everything in their power to try and impress the manager. And so for me, I think Conor Gallagher's a no-brainer if we can get him. And to be honest, anywhere up to 50 million, I'd be more than happy to see us pay. to get it over the line. I don't think he would cost more than 50 million at this point in his career. And he seems to have done fairly okay at Atletico Madrid. But, I think clearly he wants to come back to the Premier League. He'll be thinking about that. And so from a Spurs perspective, is that not a no-brainer?
Extremely high wages.
You've got to break the wage structure if you want to sign good players. It's as simple as that. Chris, would you take Conor Gallagher at Spurs?
I think it's very, very unrealistic to sign Colin Gallagher, given his Chelsea connections and other options that he would have, particularly with the wages as well. Would this be the window that Spurs change the wage structure? We all live in hope. We all live in hope that things do change, because I feel like the football club need to learn from mistakes that we've made in the past, and we do need to change and evolve in that way. To attract better players, particularly the position that we're in the Premier League table. And, if we want to be fighting on all fronts, like the board have said, like you've said, we need to, change the way that we are doing stuff. But I just cannot see the Conor Gallagher one getting done.
Is it a play? Do you think he would improve the squad?
I do. Absolutely, yes. Do you think this is a realistic move for him?
I think it is. And the only reason why I respectfully disagree with that is because right now, who are the clubs that are going to be in the market for him? Is it going to be the likes of Newcastle, Crystal Palace, perhaps, Aston Villa? These are all clubs that Spurs should be more than able to compete with. And the other thing we have to bear in mind is that, clubs like Newcastle and clubs like Aston Villa have been strapped with PSR. So Spurs are one of the fortunate clubs, one of the very few fortunate clubs that don't have such worries at this stage. So we're one of the few clubs that financially could actually get a deal done. Now, of course, the Chelsea thing is a factor, perhaps, but we also saw William Gallas play for Chelsea, Arsenal and Spurs, and Adebayor went from Arsenal to, and played to City and then to Spurs. It can happen. And I think if you are one of those players, you'd probably be looking at the situation and feeling a bit hard done by Chelsea, because he didn't get the chance. They wanted to get rid of him at the first opportunity. And they're showing no attempt to try and get him back. So I think you've also, as a footballer, got to do what's best for you. And there have been a number of players that have been boyhood fans of certain clubs and ended up, playing for other teams. Just look at, Serge Aurier. He was a boyhood Arsenal fan. James Maddison had some very unsavoury words to say about Spurs when he was younger and ended up playing for us. And Mickey van der Ven was a boyhood Liverpool fan. So these things happen. And I think ultimately, as a footballer, and at this stage in Conor Gallagher's career, he will be looking for a club where he can get crucial minutes, impress, get back in the England setup, and really kick on in his career. I mean, if you were going to ask me who the dream signing would be, if I could sign any player on the planet to improve our midfield, it'd be Scott McTominay, and I'd put 100 million on him if I had to. That would be the if I could pick anyone in world football right now for us to go and sign, it'd be Scott McTominay. But why would he leave Napoli, when he's basically God there? And there's certainly no way you'd get him without paying a ridiculous fee. We know what De Laurentiis is like at Napoli, the way that he haggles for deals and the money that he demands. But I'm sure McTominay is another player that probably has ambitions of coming back to the Premier League at some point.
Also, with the Conor Gallagher one, sources close to the player have stated that he wants to be a success at Atletico Madrid. So would he come back in this window? That's the only, that's another question mark I do have. Josh, you mentioned Mickey van der Ven. You've got a story about him?
Yeah, so IndyKayla reporting that Mickey van der Ven is not happy and is assessing his options, potentially opening the door to a summer move. Now, I mentioned just a second ago that he is a boyhood Liverpool fan. There are photos of him with his dad with a Liverpool scarf, what appears to be at Anfield, outside the Anfield gates. Now, the opportunity to play next to his compatriot Virgil van Dijk. We all know Konate's leaving Liverpool in the summer. They desperately need a long-term defensive successor to the old guard. They've got the money to spend. Mickey van der Ven has every reason to be totally unhappy at the moment. Spurs obviously desperately trying to tie him down to a new contract. There's been talk about that, and Mickey van der Ven, we know, is a one-of-a-kind defender. He is one of the most valuable defenders in the world, according to Transfermarkt. But also, we know at 24 years old, the quickest player in Premier League history, left-footed, left-sided centre-back with the world at his feet. A player of such high quality. These are the types of players you build a winning squad around. And currently, Spurs have done nothing to show that ambition that a player like Van der Ven has. And let's look at his career path so far. Van der Ven started at FC Volendam. He never played a minute in the Eredivisie, first division in the Netherlands. He played for a second division club. For those that don't know much about FC Volendam, FC Volendam is a bit of a yo-yo club. They've traditionally been a second division club, but have in recent years kind of yo-yoed between the Eredivisie and the second division. And he sold for a club record transfer in the second division, went to Wolfsburg. He had the opportunity to join Arne Slot at Feyenoord and also go to PSV as well. And he chose Wolfsburg because they had been tracking him and trying to sign him for the longest period of time. He didn't immediately get into the team. He had one appearance, and then he had a lot of appearances on, sort of sat on the bench or not even making the squad. And then there was managerial change, and he got his opportunity, and then he took it with both hands. And then the very next season, at the end of it, gets the move to Spurs. Not many people have an upward trajectory like that quickly, and that's something to be said. And when I went to watch FC Volendam against FC Twente a couple of years ago, and I went with my Mickey van der Ven away shirt. It's one of the. It was the last time I think I did buy a shirt with a name on the back, and I wore that to the Volendam game. And the things that the Volendam supporters were saying to me when they saw my shirt about Mickey van der Ven, they were without a doubt, completely all in agreement that this was the greatest player that's ever played for their football club. And this is a guy that is going to be absolutely crucial to the Dutch team's success at the World Cup. So for me, Mickey van der Ven, with everything he has to offer, Barcelona, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, PSG, Manchester City, Liverpool, he could have pick of the clubs. And if you're a player that you know, and he probably knows how good he is, right? He's a very confident guy, of course. And I don't want to get caught up in the kind of disputes that he had with the fans. I wasn't there. I don't know what was said or not said. But to be honest, he's one of those players that does wear his heart on his sleeve. He's been giving everything for this football club. And he's not one of those players that you can question the attitude or the application of. So I think he has every right to be very frustrated with what's going on. There's no way Spurs will sell him in January. That's for sure. But for me, I think we should be looking for a world record fee for a centre-back if he was to go. But then again, I don't want that to be an option. I think Van der Ven is a player you've got to do everything to tie down. And again, it comes down to wage structure. Pay him what he needs to stay, show that ambition by breaking the wage structure and signing top players to show the direction this football club really wants to move in.
Josh, we all know as Spurs fans that there's a lot of work to do in transfer windows to get to the spot where we want to get to compete on all fronts. But the players, some of these players that we do have, the likes of Van der Ven and Romero, we certainly want to be keeping them in the squad for as long as we possibly can. Romero, you mentioned Van der Ven there. Romero, what did you make of the statement that he put out after the 3-2 loss at Bournemouth? Because he then later edited the post about what he'd said about the board. What do you make of it?
Look, I think it was probably a step too far in terms of football professionalism. But as a football fan and as a Spurs fan, I absolutely loved it because Romero is one player that hasn't shied away from calling out the board in the past.
Yeah.
And this is a player that, if anyone commands the ability to talk about ambition, I think a World Cup winner and a Copa America winner and Europa League winner should have the right to do that over others. And if this was, say, Jed Spence coming out and talking about this after he gave the ball away, for the goal at the end sort of led to that winning goal for Semenyo, I'd be asking questions. But this is someone that has played with Lionel Messi. He's played with the best players in the world. And this is a player that, probably could have left the club and chose to stay on. We obviously didn't know where his future lied after the Europa League win, but he stayed on. He became club captain. And I think actually it's probably a response to all of the fans calling him out for not saying anything in the media. I think this is something that I don't know if people may disagree with this, but it's not uncommon for Argentine players to not do much media in English. That I was reading something the other day about why Messi doesn't do any English interviews, despite the fact that apparently he can speak very good English. And so the thing is, he was sort of dragged into that interview after he scored the bicycle kick at Newcastle. But I think he's made his opinions very clear. And for those fans that wanted Romero to come out and say something, he absolutely did the right thing. Now, one of the comments here says Romero does absolutely have the right to call out the ownership. Harry Kane should have done this years ago. Danny Rose called out Spurs and got slated for it. So Harry Kane, I think, is that model professional that wasn't going to ever say anything negative about the club because it given him everything he had. I think I still feel bitter about the way that Kane left the club and didn't get a proper goodbye and everything like that. But Romero, I think, was right to do that. But also, Romero has got to take some accountability himself because he's not been very good this season. There have been a number of moments where he has been actually quite poor, losing his head in the way that he did, regardless of whether he was right to be aggrieved or not for the Ekitike goal against Liverpool and then kicking out and getting himself sent off. The horrible wayward pass against Sunderland that easily could have led to a goal. I think Sunderland hit the post in the end from that. Romero is a player that's not performing at a particularly high level right now, not the level that we would expect of him. So I think that he needs to look in the mirror and players need to look in the mirror before they start calling out other people. However, that being said, what I did see was actually a very unifying message from Romero. Whilst he was very forthright in calling out the board, he did really give us a clear indication that, he is fighting for this and that players are fighting for this, which to me speaks louder about perhaps their views of the manager, perhaps their views of, the wider structure and setup at the football club. Is Thomas Frank being set up to fail by the board? Probably. But Thomas Frank as manager also has a responsibility to be getting more out of these players and the body language of these players. Chris, I want to throw this to you because you were there at Bournemouth. You go home and away every single game.
Yeah.
You film these players at the tunnel at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. You film the players at away games. Just talk me through that body language that you see from the players after a defeat like that and the body language of Thomas Frank. Because one of the most striking things I noticed from your footage was Thomas Frank was very, very, very calculated in his approach to the Spurs fans. He kept a very significant distance from those Spurs fans at full time. And also the number of players that refused to go right up to the fans. In many ways, I have a lot more respect for those that, whether they, swore at fans or had exchanges with fans, the ones that were brave enough to go up to those supporters in the heat of the moment and actually converse with them. I have a lot more respect for them than those that didn't.
Yeah. I think with what's happened this season, particularly after that Chelsea game, since that Chelsea game of Van de Ven and Spence walking past Thomas Frank, they do this thing now at half-time and at full-time. They all go to the centre of the pitch. They make sure that they're all there together and then they walk off the pitch. And they've done this for home games and away games. And of course, the boos for the away game started at Nottingham Forest when we lost 3-0. Archie Gray, of course, only having the one shot on target in that game. Really, really poor performance. And the away fans booed for the very first time away from home. Home games have been very, very difficult. And then when Thomas Frank walked over to the away end after the 0-0 draw at Brentford, he was quite bold in, walking over, and then suddenly you could see in his face that he realised that the actual boos were for him. And the closer he got to the away end, the boos actually got louder and louder and louder. And you could tell by his face that he was very surprised. He was very cautious about how close he got to the away end yesterday at Bournemouth in that 3-2 defeat, because similar thing happened. The closer he got, the boos got louder again. And then he turned back. But to be honest, Josh, if I was one of those players, I probably wouldn't do it either, because you don't want to annoy the fans any more than they are or frustrated. And it must be very difficult. If I put myself in the player's position, it must be extremely difficult when you know that fan base is really, really unhappy. Some people would exit out the doors, but some people were actually waiting there. And particularly yesterday after that Bournemouth game, so many fans walked down the stairs and they walked the closest they could to the barrier, right next to the pitch, and they wanted to say things to certain players and they wanted to boo Thomas Frank, and that's exactly what happened. But let me make this perfectly clear, where in some of these recent games, the players and the manager have been booed. Last night at the Bournemouth game, it was just for Thomas Frank. The closer Thomas Frank got to the away end, they were boos for him. But I've absolutely no doubt Thomas Frank is working hard and he really wants this to work. And it must be extremely difficult for him as a human being to have that reaction from the Tottenham Hotspur fan base. So it's a very, very difficult situation right now. But body language, you could just tell that some people or some of those players are deeply upset, and they don't like it. And like I said last night, the fans aren't enjoying this at the moment. Frank isn't enjoying it, and the players aren't enjoying it. And there was a lot of frustration yesterday. When you've got the players going over, Mickey van der Ven had obviously taken some abuse from some of the fans. He'd obviously heard something that he didn't like, and then of course he went over to the fans. I don't know what happened. I don't actually know what was said. I couldn't hear any of that. And then Pedro Porro, exactly the same. And then João Palhinha was the calming presence, actually. So he was the calming person over there, trying to settle everything down. But you could just see that some of the other players, they just thought, sod that, not getting involved. And Thomas Frank did the right thing, in my opinion, because like I've said on this channel many, many times, Frank goes over to the, he did the same at Brentford, whether they'd lose a game 4-0 or won it 4-0 or it was a 2-2 draw, however they performed, whether it was a good performance, bad performance, whatever, he has always done exactly the same thing. He has always gone around the Brentford ground, clapping the home fans. He's always gone to the away end, being Brentford boss. And he seems to have wanted to do the same at Tottenham. But then he's realised in these last couple of games, the away end, I'm going to keep my distance a little bit. So that's exactly what the situation is at the moment. It's difficult for everyone.
Look, I'll be honest. In response to that, I feel terrible for Thomas Frank on a human level. Absolutely, I really, really wanted this to work. And there are comments here, boo Thomas Frank, not the players. Fans should not boo the players. Unfortunately, these people are paid ridiculous amounts of money, and fans are paying a ridiculous amount of money as well to pay for their wages, to pay. What time did you get back in the morning, Chris, last night?
Oh, silly Ty. There's some away games where I've literally got back and had a shower and then gone straight to work. That's what you do.
So this is my point. And for me, you are professional footballers, and there is so much in this game right now where I think there seems to be this notion that you're not allowed to play under pressure, or players are under too much pressure. The only pressure I think players are under that's too much right now is the sheer number of games. That's a physical pressure, not a mental pressure necessarily. But these players are more than happy to come out and attack the fans on social media and hide behind their phone screens. Why not say it to their faces? And the thing is, if you can give it, you've also got to be able to take it as well. And so for me, while I don't like necessarily the booing for the players, this all takes me back to Fulham away last season, just before the international break. And that was the one time in years where I'd stayed behind after a game for a prolonged period of time. And I went right down to the front where Matisse Tell came into the crowd and was really apologetic. Always respected him since that point. And then I waited for the players. And the best conversation I had, now the Spurs players, they did everything they could to protect, the players and try and whiz them onto the buses. Ange Postecoglou walked out separately, and a couple of the players walked out separately because they were getting private cars to the airport or whatever it was. Their friends were picking them up. And the best conversation I had was with Guglielmo Vicario's parents, obviously ever present at all these games. And I had about a 10-minute chat with Vicario's parents, and they gave a really interesting insight into how Vicario was feeling about how things were, how the players were feeling. And Vicario, again, was the player to front the media when things didn't go well. And, Vicario is a player that, we all know he's not had a very good season by his standards. He's made a lot of mistakes this season. But what I really do start to notice in these moments are who the real leaders are and who are the ones that deserve that leadership responsibility. And Vicario is one that absolutely, in my opinion, would be in with a shout because of the way he always conducts himself after a poor performance. And he's very, very good at doing the bare minimum, which is, taking accountability. And actually, João Palhinha last night and his behaviour and his response to that was captain behaviour. And that's what a captain should be doing. And so I understand those that are very, very frustrated with Romero for not fronting media, this, that, and the other. But, in fact, Connor here has this perfectly. He says, I actually think Mickey Palhinha and Porro coming over shows they care about the team so much. You can tell they are hurting just as much as the fans. It's not pretty right now. I completely agree with that sentiment. And that's why I completely disagree with the idea of not going over to the fans, although I completely understand why you say that, Chris. If you were in that position, I think you've got to own that as a player because these fans are everything at a football club. And
what I meant by that is if you are getting abuse at a football match, you don't know how that's going to end. And
sure.
I feel sometimes it's better off to ignore that situation because it's only going to end one way in arguments, and it's probably going to end up being worse than what it was in the first place. So
yeah, and I think
it's a difficult situation, but I do get that. I do get that sometimes leaders need to lead, but not everyone needs to be involved in that.
But I think also, we all as fans have a responsibility to keep ourselves in check. We're all going to get really frustrated. We're all going to, swear and cuss and get really, really angry at what's going on. But when things start to get genuinely vile and abusive or physically violent, then that's a problem. And that no matter how bad the players play, there is no place for that. And so I think, of course, unfortunately, with some of these situations, it creates some really ugly moments within our own supporters, and you get our own supporters fighting with one another in the stands and having altercations, and it turns really ugly there. And this is what a toxic football club creates, unfortunately. And this is the sort of toxic cycle, the loop that we seem to be stuck in right now. And the only thing that can genuinely change that is positive performances, positive results, and investment from the board and ambition being shown from the board. So all the answers, and it all starts from the top. And so if the board can start changing this process by breaking that wage structure, by investing in the top players possible, backing the manager, who, whether it be Thomas Frank or someone else, then you're giving ourselves the best opportunity to turn those performances around, to turn the performances and the results around, and things will get better for all of us. Now, the obvious comparison is when things were great under Pochettino, how good was life as a Tottenham fan in those years under Pochettino, especially those 3 seasons, the first season at Wembley and the 2 seasons where we challenged for the title, especially that final season at White Hart Lane, it felt like a party carnival atmosphere every time we turned up at the ground, whether it be Swansea at home or whether it be Arsenal. And it's possible to get back to that place, but the amount of work that's needed to get there all comes from the board. And also, having more onus put on engaging with the fans. The board should be engaging regularly with the fans. We shouldn't be, and Romero's right on this, the board should not be coming out when things are just great and then saying, things and doing these PR exercises. The club should be coming out and saying things when things get really bad. The club should be offering concessions. They should be offering, it's also the little things that go with it. That's all well and good, but for whatever reason, Enoch and Daniel Levy, when he was at the club, didn't seem to realise that investing in the football team is the single biggest way to create revenue. Because if you can create a winning team, winning creates more revenue and more global outreach than anything else you can possibly do in football. And I don't know why they seem to think that that's not the case, but that's got to change. And, even things like, the Save Our Seniors campaign and freezing season ticket prices are bare minimum. The club obviously made that gesture after the Newcastle defeat, the 6-1 with Stellini in charge. That was exactly the type of example where Spurs fans probably should have been refunded. Or, German clubs, for example, they offer a drink and a snack and cheaper travel to these games. And we're not seeing any of these gestures from the club. And the club is doing the bare minimum. Instead, they failed to read the room. We've been piss poor over the Christmas period. And they think, oh, well, let's spread some Christmas cheer, despite the fact we're playing crap, by doing some stupid talent competition on YouTube. And that's going to read the room. It just seems like whoever is running that PR operation at Spurs and the comms operation at Spurs just cannot read the room at all. And it just seems like one thing of disrespect after another thing of disrespect. And the whole thing just circulates into this vicious cycle that is only going to end if the board pull their finger out, break the wage structure, sign top players, and treat the fans like fans and not like client reference numbers.
We did get a free scarf Bodo away, and we did get a free scarf Nottingham Forest away recently.
Oh, great performances, both of those games.
Josh, lastly, I just wanted to ask you about Christian Romero's comments. Does it help Thomas Frank? Does it help the football club try to attract players in transfer windows? So when you think about what he said, this goes far and wide. This has been widely reported absolutely everywhere. Does it help Thomas Frank and the football club trying to attract players in windows? And I suppose what I want to ask is, with the ambition of the football club, what's next? Because if we can't attract those players, what happens next?
Yeah, I mean, look, fundamentally, I think the manager has a massive role to play in attracting players to a football club. I'm sure of it. And I'm going to kind of go off piste a little bit and try and answer your question.
Before you do, when Thomas Frank said only a couple of days ago in one of the press conferences that everybody is aligned, and then literally you've got like 48 hours later, you got Romero coming out and saying what he did. It's not a good look, is it? And the way that Thomas Frank in his press conference today said, "Look, we're all aligned as a football club. We are all aligned." And then when one of the journalists said to Thomas Frank, "Well, is Christian Romero aligned with what with the board?" And he said, "Well, you have to ask him."
Yeah. So no, of course not. And people can see through that, right? We can all see through that. If you and I can see through it, then players can see through it. It's clear that everyone is not aligned. It's clear by the body language. It's clear by the fact that some players decide to go up and confront the fans. Others decide not to go. The manager doesn't seem to go, up to the supporters. He distances himself. It's very clear that they're not aligned. I think it was very clear in the body language of the players getting off the coach at Bournemouth. I saw video footage of that. How few of them engaged with the Spurs fans. So clearly that is not the case. Now, where I'm going to take this, and it's going to go on off piece, and I want to caveat this by saying I am in no way calling for Ange Postecoglou to return to Spurs. No way. But what I am saying is, listen to the difference between Ange Postecoglou talking and Thomas Frank talking. Even when we were sat in 17th place, Ange Postecoglou was talking about the club in a way that I believe in myself. I believe in this fantastic group of players. I believe in our system, in our football philosophy. I believe in everything we're trying to do. And what did that finish with? That finished with a Europa League trophy, which, regardless of the Premier League season, was, I think it's fair to say, will go down as every Spurs supporter's one of the best days of their lives. I think that will turn out, unless we go and win the Champions League, I think that will be the best holiday I've ever been on in my life. And we obviously had many a beer out there together, Chris. But, I mean, everything about it, I would do anything to go back, right? But even when things were bad under Postecoglou, there was still this belief there. And then that was backed up. There was that overlap interview with Mickey van der Ven and Gary Neville recently. And the way in which van der Ven spoke about Ange Postecoglou compared to the way he spoke about Thomas Frank, and the way in which all of the players seemed to speak about Postecoglou after he had lost his job, is really, really telling. Here is a man that inspires players, regardless of what we think of Postecoglou, regardless of whether he's the right man or not, inspired that group of players, got them over the line for the first time in 17 years with that group of players, which, by the way, other than losing Sonny, on paper is a stronger squad now that we have than we had then when we won the Europa League. Right? We've got a stronger squad on paper now. So for me, there is a huge part of why we're not going to be able to attract those top players. If you have a manager that has a clear identity, this is what I believe in, is very forthright. Any manager under the sun can say, want to play front foot, aggressive, attacking football, right? And then you can back it up with words. Even when it doesn't work, you can still back it up. You can see what they're trying to do. Under Postecoglou, as bad as the football got, were we still entertained? That's a genuine question, Chris. Would you say we were still entertained even in the games we lost for the most part?
Some.
And those games that we weren't were the games that we played a second string side because we'd already decided to.
Well, this is another problem, with the medical staff, because we keep replacing the medical staff, looking for new medical staff, because even under Ange, even under Frank now, this is an ongoing problem. The injury record that we have had in the last couple of years has just been unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that we really there needs to be a public inquiry into this. Almost, it feels like, because under Postecoglou, what we were hearing was it was his training methods that were causing this and the intense pressing. But the thing that concerns me is not the injuries in the first place; it's the lack of recovery time. It's how slow it takes for players to come back from injury. It's the fact that we seem to constantly have this situation where a player's out for, say, 3 months. And then 3 months is later, and they get out onto the grass, and the first time they touch grass, they get injured again for another 3 months. This is the thing that is very bizarre. And then we spoke about this yesterday, the communication around the injury. Like Dom Solanke's situation has got to be one of the weirdest injury situations I have ever seen.
Yeah.
And the lack of communication around it is just utterly bizarre. So for me, there are question marks about that medical department. But in answer to your first question, in terms of attracting players, I don't think players are necessarily going to look at, I don't want to come to Spurs in case I get injured. I just don't think that's how footballers think. But we clearly have a man that doesn't know what his system is. He doesn't know what his identity is. And he's used all the buzzwords: attacking football, free-flowing, front foot, entertaining. And we've not seen any of that, really. We saw that, actually, arguably, we saw that for the first 15 minutes against Bournemouth yesterday. And we saw it, arguably, in the first half against Sunderland. And then that wasn't sustained. And the only times we've really seen that is against Burnley, what we really need is a manager that knows what he believes in, has a clear way of playing, and is something that the squad can buy into. But I do not believe for 1 second that these players are buying into whatever it is that Thomas Frank and his coaching staff are doing. I really don't. And unfortunately, as much as I have a huge amount of respect for what Thomas Frank has achieved as a coach, the whole operation seems very amateurish. And maybe there's an arrogance that we have as Spurs fans. Maybe we're being too entitled. But when you pay the season ticket prices that we pay in the arena that we pay, that we go and watch our football in, when we were promised that this will bring winning football and we will compete on all fronts, and the board have kind of set up this expectation, then this is what you're going to get. And Tottenham is still one of the most successful football clubs in English football history. But it just feels like the operation, we've gone backwards. It feels like we are acting like a minnow. We're acting like we are Brentford. We're acting like we are one of those smaller clubs. And that's not where any of us want to be. And so for me, clearly, Frank and all the people around him are not doing the business. And it's no surprise that Wells went and took that managerial job over in the States. He wants to go and prove himself. I'm sure if things were going swimmingly well at Spurs, I'm not sure Wells necessarily takes that job. So I think for me, I want to see us go and get a manager that's going to have a clear identity. And look, we're all going to be divided on who we should get, who we shouldn't get. I will die on the rock of, die on the hill of wanting to see Pochettino return, even though he didn't win anything. I always feel like there was, unfinished business, and he was failed miserably by the board, not signing a player in 500 days. But I suppose the thing is now, and I want to ask you this, Chris, is there a single manager you can name that Spurs could potentially get that would unify our entire fan base? Or do you think we're too far gone? Because for me, I thought Pochettino would be the one name that could unite the fan base.
I think the majority of fans would love to see Poch back one day. And it's so weird, Josh, because I did a fan show earlier, and the amount of people, including you now, that bring up Pochettino. And someone actually put on X the other day, Cowling just wants Pochettino back, his favourite. I never mention Poch. And what I always say to everybody who mentions his name is, why do people think that he's just going to walk in the door, click his fingers, and everything is going to just be magical and everything is going to be great? Because whether it's Thomas Frank, whether it's Pochettino, whether it's somebody else, we've all said, we need to learn from the mistakes that we've made in the past. We need to have better recruitment. The wage structure needs to change. We need to show more ambition on the pitch in terms of transfer windows. So if you were Pochettino, or you were indeed another manager, if Thomas Frank did depart the football club. And I might add as well, some of Thomas Frank's press conference comments today, when he was asked about, do you feel pressure or, about more time, he looked really confused and said, more time. No doubt about that. So he seems very, very confident in his job right now. And for any Spurs fans saying that Frank would get the sack after Saturday if we lost against Villa at home, I don't believe that at all. I think that Thomas Frank is here to stay right now. And when he talks so openly about the relationship with Vinay Venkatesham and being aligned with Fabio and being aligned with Johan, I think they've definitely had a conversation where they've gone, don't worry about this season. We are in a transition, and as long as we finish above 17th, it's a success. I genuinely believe that.
Yeah, look, okay. So I think what I would just say on the Frank front is, I don't know, but what we do know is that when the Spurs fans' voices get loud enough, especially at home games, often the board click their fingers and act. When the pressure gets so obscene, the board always seems to crumble and act. Now, on Pochettino, here's what I would say on this. I went and looked through, in fact, I sent in our group chat the squads that Pochettino inherited versus the squad that Thomas Frank has inherited. And in fact, I can probably wheel this out now. which is that we, in my opinion, had a worse squad when Pochettino came to Spurs than we currently have now on paper. And those are about to say, oh, Harry Kane. Well, no, Harry Kane was not yet proven. He'd had a couple of Premier League appearances and he'd had some loans. His first breakout season was Pochettino's first year, but we didn't know that he was going to explode like that when Pochettino came on the scene.
Yeah, true.
We didn't know that.
Yeah.
He improved the likes of Eric Lamela, Nasser Chadli, Andros Townsend, Nabil Bentaleb. These are players that did a shift for us in the first season. Let's not forget, if we're going to talk about, but he had Vertonghen and he had, okay, well, we also had Vlad Kirikes and Federico Fazio as our centre-backs. Yep. So we had Carl Norton still at the club. Danny Rose was certainly nowhere near the level that he reached. Carl Walker was getting there, but not quite there. Dele Alli, was certainly an unknown. He'd come in from MK Dons. We didn't know how he was going to perform. Eriksen reached heights that he hadn't previously reached at Spurs. And the thing, I think the overriding message is that Pochettino came to Spurs at a time when things were pretty chaotic. We just had Tim Sherwood in for the latter part of the second part of the season, wearing his infamous gilet. And there was that moment, wasn't there? Was it against Aston Villa, I want to say, where he got the fan to come and sit in the dugout, which was a great laugh for all of us. But, we'd come from a moment where things were a little bit ropey. And, of course, we were in a slightly more competitive position than we're in right now. But points-wise, similar. And then he, over time, improved every single one of those players, I would say. Near enough. Every single one of those players improved. You could see the footage that the club was putting out in training, and the players were always laughing, smiling, having a great time. It wasn't just Poch, it was Jesus Perez and Miguel D'Agostino and Tony Jimenez. You could see even watching the warm-ups. And I was always one of these people. I used to love, I don't do it so much anymore, but when I was, younger and Poch was there, I would love to go and watch the warm-ups because I used to love watching what the players were doing and because they looked like they were having so much fun. And one of those things was seeing how Tony Jimenez would laugh and joke with the goalkeepers in the warm-up. That's always the first thing you see when the goalkeepers come out first. Yep. The fact that they truly got the club, they understood what it meant to be at this football club. They understood us as a fan base. They respected us as a fan base. The very fact that when they had been sacked and they left the club, there was more than enough footage going around of them still donning their Spurs training wear, on social media, which says a lot, And let's not forget, of course, we built something and we were in touching distance from potentially even becoming a team that could be Premier League champions.
Yeah.
86 points in that final season at the Lane, 17 wins, 2 draws at home. That magical ending against Man United, in that final game. That 3-0 win against United as well, I think it was the season before, wasn't it? Where we scored 3 goals in 6 minutes. The wins against Manchester City, the wins against Arsenal, the wins against Chelsea, Ali scoring that header, even winning at Stamford Bridge, which nobody has done since. So for me, we got to all these semi-finals, finals. We were competitive throughout. And then the board decided not to sign anyone for 500 days. And even despite that, we still got to a Champions League final. And the players that we were attracting then and the signings that we were making were not huge amounts of money, but the likes of Victor Wanyama, who came in and was a very, very good signing for us. The likes of Lucas Moura, who came in and was phenomenal. Fernando Llorente. I think that was the last time we made a genuinely good January transfer, wasn't it? Fernando Llorente came in and played a crucial role in that run to the Champions League final. The types of players we were bringing into the football club, even though the fees weren't the biggest, were players of real quality. And everything about the club was in the right place. So, okay, we can go back We can go back in time and people say, oh, well, it's happened now. You can't go back to your ex. Okay, fine. But who else in world football right now can come in who truly understands our football club, who truly understands the quirks, the good and the bad, who showed nothing but respect to our fan base, always, and played very good attacking football? I think for me, it's the obvious choice after the World Cup. And I'm sure there are going to be other managers, out there, and I'm sure there are some that will do a very good job. I'm a big fan of Glasner. I'm a fan of Hertzler as well at Brighton. But,
we've got half a season left, Josh, and Thomas Frank is here to stay.
And we're going to have to put up, unfortunately. We're going to have to put up. Unfortunately, it's going to get worse than this probably before it gets better. But what I would say is you give a opportunity to a manager that proved over time that he could build and was trusted to deliver a project. And I think the truth is we're harping back to those days when we were competitive, where we were challenging for things, even though we didn't win anything. That was the last time the football club was genuinely really, really good. And look, okay, someone's just commented here about Poch. He went to Chelsea, of course. Okay, what are you going to do if you got sacked by Spurs? And
Josh, hold on. When I did the fan show earlier, Alex came on and I asked him the question. He was going on about Poch as well. And I said, look, yes or no, have you actually got over Pochettino being sacked? It sounds like you've never got over it.
No. I to this day, I'm still absolutely furious that we did that in the first place, because that's the only reason why he ended up at, why he ended up at Chelsea in the first place. And also, look, again, we've got these comments about, Poch had Kane. Yeah, Kane wasn't the made player when Poch came in. He was still a kid. And he had a breakout season and he improved year on year and played with some brilliant players. And that's a lot down to Harry Kane. And of course, that's the case. But, imagine what someone like Poch could do with the likes of Luca Williams-Barnett, Mikey Moore, amongst others. Who knows what we could achieve? And look, okay, this is my favourite shout of all. And I know this is completely bonkers, but Harry Redknapp obviously came out and said he'd manage West Ham for free. That was the other time of my life, I think, as a Spurs fan, was the Harry Redknapp days. I would absolutely love Harry Redknapp for half a season. I'd even take Tim Sherwood back with his gilet. But this just cannot go on. It cannot go on.
This is meant to be a transfer show, and all you've done is pine about Pochettino and Harry Redknapp. You stop being so sentimental.
Well, maybe that's the transfer that maybe that's the biggest transfer that this football club needs, is a change of manager. But look, we can go back to transfers. It's absolutely fine. But for me, no matter what happens, this is not going to get better under Thomas Frank, in my opinion. And who is going to want to join this basket case of a football club when this is what is happening under this manager?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. Those are all the stories that we've got today. So, Josh, thanks so much for joining me. Where can people find you on social media?
At Josh Hughes TV on X. I've decided to start tweeting a little bit more recently. And you'll catch me here on the Spurs Chat Podcast, on the transfer show. I'm sure plenty more over the coming weeks. But
absolutely.
You will see me in January, but you will not see me in February, because in February I will not be here. No, I think all I would say is, look, I think at this point we're both tired, and it's time to go home.
Very tired indeed. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. And yes, we will see you again very soon. That is it for today. As I mentioned, 25 days left of the January transfer window. It does go on until the 2nd of Feb, 7 p.m. And we will be here every single day covering all of the latest Spurs news, rumours and reports involving the transfer window. So thanks so much for joining us. Have a great weekend, everyone, and we will see you again soon. Come on, you Spurs.